Hey guys, it's Justin with Shock Therapy once again, and we're going to show you how to install our radius rods on a Can-Am X3. This installation video will show you how to install these radius rods, whether you have a chromoly version or our billet version. Both options are extremely strong and race tested. Laid out in front of me, you're going to see both versions of this kit, the billet and chromoly, complete with all of the components that we supply in these kits. It's always a good idea to lay the components out on the workbench in advance of installing them to make sure, number one, that you have all the parts you need, and number two, you get a good idea of what's involved in the kit. As you can see with this chromoly radius rod kit laid out in front, we have 4 radius rods that are shorter and 2 that are longer. The 2 that are longer for an X3 are the toe links or the center radius rods. 2 of the radius rods that are the shorter version come from us set to a specific length, and that is the lower radius rod. Do not adjust these. The 2 upper radius rods come loose, and those will be adjusted to control your alignment. The kit comes with 24 stainless steel spacers and 2 Shock Therapy labels. These labels will go on to the toe links once the toe is set and the alignment is done. We also have laid out in front of you a billet radius rod kit, which consists of the same exact lengths as the previous, 4 short, 2 long radius rods, which are your toe links, 24 stainless steel spacers. The only difference between the 2 kits is that these toe links have engraved Shock Therapy logos, and the 4130 kit has 2 stick-on labels. One thing that's very important to point out, and one of the reasons why you possibly purchased our radius rod kit, is that we have the largest rod ends in the industry for any radius rod kit. Standard rod end size is 5/8 on radius rod kits throughout the market. We supply our radius rods with 3/4 inch rod ends. The biggest in the industry, the strongest in the industry. This translates to the longest lasting system you can buy. The largest rod end, the highest strength, the longest lasting, and no squeaks is what separates us and our radius rods from the rest of the industry. Now that we've gone over all the components included in the kit, let's send this over to Steve so he can show us how to install this onto your car.
Let's be real. No one wants to get poked in the eye with a giant rod. Always wear your safety glasses.
Step 1 is to loosen all the lug nuts on the rear wheels of the car. Then, jack the car up and completely remove both wheels and tires. Make sure that you use jack stands to support the chassis while you're doing the radius rod installation. Next, using the proper tools, remove the upper and lower hub bolt, completely disassembling them from the trailing arm. Save the hardware as it will be used again. Next, loosen the 3rd radius rod or toe link from the hub. Save all of the hardware as it might be used again. You can repeat these 3 steps for the other side. Next, remove the double shear plate from the frame mounts. In these instructions, we're using a geyser double shear plate, but the same thing happens whether it's a stock plate or any aftermarket double shear plate. Now remove all radius rods from the car and the hubs. Next, lay out our radius rod kit on the bench. Steve has the radius rods laid out as if they would be installed on the car, with the shorter 2 placed in the top and bottom position, and the longest radius rod in the middle, which is your toe link. There are 24 stainless steel spacers supplied in the kit. They install in each rod end attached to each radius rod. Our radius rods are set up with right-hand thread and left-hand threaded rod ends. The left-hand threaded side is denoted by a grooved machined line in the end of the radius rod. Some people prefer to have all of their left-hand rod ends on the same side as they install them on the car. If this is something that is important to you, make sure that they're laid out accordingly with all of the left-hand threads on the same side. Our radius rods are sent with the lower radius rods locked in position. This locked length is exactly the same overall width, hole to hole, as the stock lower radius rod. It is extremely important not to change the length of the lower radius rod. It is the constant in the system and should never be changed. If you change the length of the lower radius rod different from stock, you run the risk of damaging the CVs and axles and possibly pulling them out of the trans. Never change this lower length.
Hey guys, we got a pro tip for you. So a lot of you guys are probably freaking out noticing that Steve is measuring not from the center of the hole. The reason that we don't do that is because it's very easy to move the tape around when you're trying to judge where the center of the hole is. It's very easy though to hook the outside of the ball on one end and measure to the inside of the ball on the other. This is exactly the same as measuring hole to hole, but it's a lot easier to do faster. So that's your pro tip in making these measurements a lot easier to do, especially when you're by yourself. One other thing to remember, duplicate the upper link and the toe link to the stock dimensions of your factory radius rods. The stock upper link measurement is 26 5/8. The center radius rod, which is your toe link, the factory dimension is 28 3/8 from hole to hole. Duplicate all the factory lengths with these as you install them, and you will find that your alignment process of the installation of this kit will go a lot faster.
Since the lower radius rods supplied in the kit are locked down to the correct length, the only thing you should check is the length of the upper radius rod. Make sure that they match the overall width, hole to hole, as your stock upper radius rod. Leave the upper radius rod and toe links loose when you install them on the car so that the car can be aligned easily. It's always a good idea to lay out all of the radius rods and spacers as if they were going to be installed on your car. This helps to not make any mistakes, making sure that the lower links that are locked down at a certain length are installed on the bottom of the hub and bottom of the frame mount. First step is to install the upper radius rod. This radius rod should still be left loose after you've checked its overall length to match the stock upper. Make sure that the stainless steel spacers are installed in all of the rod ends when you do this. Next step is to install the toe link, which is the center radius rod. Starting with the factory hardware on the hub, install it there and then move to the frame. This should be left loose for alignment purposes later. It makes it easier to use the stock nut on the frame mounts on the stud finger tight just to hold the radius rods in place until all of them are mounted and you can install the double shear plate. Last, install the lower radius rod. This radius rod is locked down from us as it's shipped and should never be adjusted. Repeat the process on the other side. It's helpful to use your legs to line the hub and arm up using the factory hardware. Next, remove the nuts that we installed to hold the radius rods temporarily. Now, line up all the studs with the double shear plate. It's helpful to start with the top two, working your way down to the next pair and then the final set on the bottom. Again, once the stud lines up, install one nut to hold it in place and move forward to the next stud. Once all the studs are lined up with the double shear plate, go ahead and tighten them all. All these are 12 millimeter, which requires 95 foot-pounds. You can also tighten all the hardware on the hub side at this point. Next step, jack the car up, remove the jack stands, and install the wheels and tires. By driving the car back and forth, settle the suspension to ride height. You cannot do this simply by jumping up and down on the back of the car. You must drive it around the block, or at least back and forth to settle it. As always, we recommend that you take your car to a qualified alignment shop to do a proper alignment. But we also know that you're probably going to do this yourself, at least to get it started. Set the front wheels and tires perfectly straight with the steering wheel straight in the car. Step back behind the car, lining the rear tire up with the front tire visually. You will be able to see if the rear tire's toe, or the front of it facing in or out, matches the front tire. Adjust the center link, or toe link, in or out by twisting it to adjust this toe setting. Get it close to the front tires to start. Once the toe is set in an approximate location to match the front tires, now look at the camber adjustment. This is the angle of the tire from top to bottom, whether it is leaning out or leaning in. You want the rear tires to match the front tires. Typically, this is 0 camber or perfectly vertical to -1 degree, which is in at the top by about 1/2 inch. Adjust the upper radius rod in or out to adjust the top of the tire in or out. Once you have the rear tires matching the front tires from a camber standpoint, you can lock down the upper radius rods by tightening the jam nut on the rod end against the chromoly radius rod. Once you've locked down the upper radius rod to lock your camber adjustment in place, you need to recheck the toe set. This is now done with a tape measure. Butt the tape measure against the inside of the tire sidewall on both ends. You want to set the toe to be 1/4 inch toed in. This means that the front of the tires are 1/4 inch closer to each other and the rear of the tires are 1/4 inch farther apart.
All right, one more pro tip for you guys now that you've got this alignment fairly close. Even though you have your toe set 1/4 inch in, you can still have both tires off to one side with the toe set correctly. This right here will help you align the tires straight with the car so it does not dog track. First, grab a tape measure and any straight edge you have laying around. Since I'm by myself, I'm just going to use my leg to hold it up against the tire and measure someplace on the trailing arm. It does not matter where you measure, as long as where you're measuring is duplicated when you go to do the other side. This measurement on this side is 13 3/4 inch to the straight edge. Let's check the other side and see what it is. Now on our car, those measurements were spot on because we've actually done this check on this car. But let's just say that your measurement was 1 inch off from left to right. For instance, 13 inches on one side, 12 inches on the other. What you want to do is get the same measurement on both sides. So take your toe link on one side and pull the tire out. Take the toe link on the other side and pull the tire in. Exactly the same amount on both adjustments till you have those two measurements from the straight edge to the trailing arm the same. That'll make sure that your toe is set correctly and in line with the center of the car. Now, as always, make sure you take this to an alignment shop. They would have done that for you and it would be spot on, but this will at least get you close so you can take it over there. Good luck.
Once you've reached this measurement, you can lock down the jam nuts on the rod ends to the toe links. With all jam nuts locked in place, you're just about done. The final thing to do is install the Shock Therapy logos on the center links 2 inches away from the pivot. We have you install these badges so that you can have them perfectly straight once the car is aligned.
Thank you, Steve, for showing us how to install those radius rods on an X3. Also, really appreciate the fact you've gotten into the green theme of that car and given us your Zen approach, especially with the bonsai tree, which I know you've named Bonzi. Very cool, and appreciate that. Now, for all of you who've watched that installation, we hope that your installation goes as simple as Steve's. A few things are very important to maintain and watch throughout the process, even after you've installed the kit. Our radius rod kits are fully adjustable. We do not want you to adjust or change the lower link length. We send them locked for a reason that maintains the integrity of the rear geometry on your car. The upper link and toe link should be adjusted to control your alignment. The upper link controls camber. The toe link controls toe. As always, we recommend that you take your car to a professional alignment shop to get it dialed in perfect. But if you're like a lot of people who probably aren't going to do that, make sure you spend the time to get it as close as possible. Grab some friends, adjust the toe according to your tape measure measurements, adjust your camber according to the front tire comparison, and you should be fine. If you notice that your alignment in the rear of the car has changed after you've driven it a few times, check the jam nuts on the system. If they've loosened up and moved, your alignment will change. From time to time, double check that the jam nuts are completely tight and you won't have this issue in the future. From experience, we've seen where people have alignment issues with their car before they install radius rods. Our radius rods will not cure all bent components that might exist on your car. Once you install our radius rods and you find that you can't get the thing aligned properly, you need to take a look at trailing arms that possibly have a bend or a frame movement that was existing before the installation. Thank you for purchasing our radius rod kits, and if you have any other questions, contact us at the shop at 623-217-4959 or go to our website at shocktherapist.com.
All right, Steve, you're fat. Go.
Testicles.
All right, we're good.
We've done old man, we've done fuzzy nuts.
Yep.
Now what are we gonna do?
Fucking orangutan.
How about ice water prune nuts?
Shriveled testicles, tight testicles.
Tight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The inside, the taint testicles.
Taint? Testes?
Yeah.
Did you know samurai could do that on command? Samurai train themselves to suck their nuts up in during a fight because if someone kicked them, then they never got kicked in the nuts.